Okay, to look at coronary circulation, the heart is an organ, just like your liver or your stomach are organs. So the heart is an organ, and the heart chambers fill with blood. But that myocardium with the cardiac muscle cells is too thick for oxygen and nutrients to diffuse from the blood that's in the chambers to all of the cells in the heart. And for that reason, we have this set of blood vessels that provide coronary circulation. The main systemic artery that's going into the systemic circulatory pump is the ascending aorta. And so the left ventricle pumps that blood into the ascending aorta. And just as soon as it gets out of the left ventricle, there are two branches, the right and left coronary arteries. And they travel through that groove, the right and left atrioventricular sulci, or sulci. That's the groove that's between the atria and the ventricle on the outside of the heart. So the right and left coronary arteries travel through there. Now the right coronary artery is going to travel down and around the side along the right atrioventricular sulcus. And then it's going to have several branches to supply the right atrium and the ventricle. The largest branch is the marginal artery. And after it branches, the right coronary artery curls around to the posterior heart, and it travels through the posterior interventricular sulcus between the two ventricles, and so we call it the posterior interventricular artery. Now the left coronary artery, it comes out of that ascending aorta, and it also branches into two vessels. The anterior interventricular artery, that's going to travel along the anterior interventricular sulcus, the groove that goes between the front of the heart, between the ventricles, and it's at the apex of the heart. It curls around and travels along the posterior interventricular sulcus a little bit. The circumflex artery curves along the atrioventricular sulcus and goes around the heart, and it supplies the left atrium and part of the left ventricle. And for some people, it replaces the right coronary artery that becomes the posterior interventricular artery. Your arteries in your coronary circulation are kind of complicated because you have anastomosis that form, which are channels that form between blood vessels, and the coronary arteries can form these extra branches from the pericardium or even from the coronary circulation on the outside of the heart, and they can connect to each other. And that's a good thing, because when blood flow to part of your myocardium is not sufficient, you'll have these new anastomosis that might form that provide a different route of blood flow to the myocardium. It's called collateral circulation. And that protects the muscle cells from damage if you've got blocked vessels. So this is what we've been talking about. Oop, I keep hitting that. I'm sorry. Okay, here's the right side of the heart. Here's the left side of the heart. Okay, so right after the blood enters this ascending aorta, you've got a branch. The left coronary artery, it's going to travel down this sulcus, okay, the interventricular sulcus. And you can see how it travels. So we call it the anterior interventricular artery. Over here on the back side, here's the circumflex artery that's going to branch from it. It also, you got the posterior view with the posterior interventricular artery. Here's the marginal artery that goes down the side of the ventricle. So you'll be learning all of these in your lab a lot better than just mentioning them because they kind of run together. Now the veins, all of the arteries in the heart will empty into the veins, and all of the veins will empty into a large area of a vessel that's called a coronary sinus. The coronary sinus has blood from the great cardiac vein, the small cardiac vein, and the middle cardiac vein that empty into it. And then the coronary sinus empties into the right atrium. So you see, here's the small cardiac vein, here's the great cardiac vein, and on the back side of the heart you can see the middle cardiac vein, and they all empty into this enlarged area of this vessel called the coronary sinus, and then that empties into the right atrium of the heart. They can do an angiography to insert a little tube through an artery in systemic circuit, and it goes, usually it's the femoral artery, and they will trace it all the way up to the ascending aorta and into the coronary arteries, and then they inject dye, and when they x-ray it they're able to see if there are any blockages. Angioplasty is an invasive procedure where they insert a balloon in the blocked artery, and a piece of wire mesh tubing called a stent is inserted in there to keep it open. Sometimes, though, they have to do a coronary bypass. This is a lot more invasive, where they take part of a vein and they bypass the blockage in the coronary artery by sewing it, grafting it into the artery before the blockage, and then the other side of that vein that they're using, they'll graft it after the blockage into the artery, and they totally bypass the blockage, but that's more invasive. The great vessels, as I said, those are the blood vessels that bring blood to the heart and take it away from the heart. And the major veins, systemic veins, are the superior vena cava or superior vena cava. That's going to drain all the deoxygenated blood from anywhere above the diaphragm. And then the inferior vena cava or inferior vena cava is going to drain the deoxygenated blood from any veins that are inferior to the diaphragm, and it's going to empty directly into the heart, into the right atrium. The pulmonary trunk is the largest vessel that delivers blood to the pulmonary circuit. It receives the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle, and it carries the blood up, and then it splits into the right and left pulmonary arteries, and that's what carries the blood on into the lungs to the pulmonary capillaries where the gases are exchanged. And then once you've got oxygenated blood, it will travel back through a set of pulmonary veins. There are 4 of them, 2 that are right, 2 that are left, and those veins bring that oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. So the pulmonary arteries carry deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood, and that's different from almost all of the other arteries and veins in the body, because usually arteries carry oxygenated and veins carry deoxygenated, but it's different in the pulmonary circuit. Now the aorta is the biggest blood vessel in the body. It's the largest and the thickest, and it supplies blood to the entire systemic circuit. At the left ventricle, you have the ascending aorta, and it curves over the top of the heart in a U-turn. That's the aortic arch that you see here. So here's the ascending aorta, and then the aortic arch curves over the heart. and you can see how it curves over because this is the back side of the heart. You can also see where the pulmonary trunk empties into the right pulmonary arteries and the left pulmonary arteries that take it to the lungs, and then coming back from the lungs, the left pulmonary veins and the right pulmonary veins bring it to the left atrium.